So the explore phase is really, it's a somewhat messy, organic process of coming up with ideas and understanding the customer's perspective through the lens of a framework for understanding their mindset, which we use the LIFT model, which a lot of you probably seen before. But the explore components are really tools that we can pull in to understand a richer picture of that target audience's mindset. User research is important for this, right? Website surveys, you've heard of like NPS surveys, Net Promoter Score surveys, which can be very revealing about what your prospects actually think and your customers think about you. Eye tracking, I'll show you some examples. Targeted website surveys, they may be on the site, maybe follow-up questions using Net Promoter Score or some other type of pop-up or user accessed feedback loop. And those can be really interesting to get the voice of the customer to understand how they talk about your solutions and the questions they have about your business. When there's a high scale, we'll do look for patterns within these surveys and look for interesting types of words that might be used that can feed into hypotheses for testing. Then we'll do things like eye tracking gaze plots. And so this is a user study example where we have an eye tracking setup here in our office, and we'll bring in target audience, do eye tracking studies. But often when people do this, you can get an eye tracker, and for a few $1,000s you can get a setup within your office. But how do you know how to get insights out of this? It takes experience to really understand how to analyze all of these videos and aggregate heat maps to understand how people are using it. So in this example, you'll see the gaze going all over the screen, but what does it really mean? Well, it turns out that the categories in the left side of the page are some of the most important things, but the eye tracking gaze plot was missing that completely because of the way the eye flow was structured with the colors and the pictures and the orientation. That's a potential insight that can lead to conversion rate lift. We'll use it eye tracking heat maps. So in this case, you see the heat maps opposite to the last one, concentrated in the left side. But some of the offers that were very important were in the right rail, and so they were being missed. That can lead to hypotheses for changing it into a different layout, a different eye flow for testing. So all of these components, you never know where the insights are going to come from, but because we have experienced eyes looking at these things, and through experience of seeing hundreds of other examples, can see the patterns and quickly identify where there might be hypotheses to make improvements. And then digital analytics is very important, right? Looking at web analytics, looking at click heat map analytics, looking at scroll map analytics, and again, the expertise of how to understand them is important. A lot of people are saying that click heat maps and scroll maps are useless, right? They're just eye candy for senior executives, and in a lot of cases that may be true, but there can be insights. In this example, you can see that there's most people are stopping at these 4 tiles, right, where the red starts to go to green. People are stopping and not reading further. But what was interesting about this, if you just look at that, you might say, okay, great, people scroll, a third of the way down the page, typical. I don't know if there's anything useful for that. But what we saw, what the strategists saw, was that these 4 tiles are creating a false bottom, and yet down below that are these 3 components which are actually the core value proposition of the software that Telestream's offering in this page. And that can lead to, of course, ideas for improving this page and testing new layouts. And I'll show you the result in a moment. Another tool that is in our strategist toolbelt is behavior tracking through mouse recording. And this is an example of a tool that we're building actually internally called LiftMap, which is a tool for strategists, our strategists, and soon to be released to the public to use. And what we saw is that when we did a mouse recording of beta users actually using the tool, there were some interesting insights from it. Let's see if I can get this to play. It doesn't seem to be playing for me right now, but what was interesting, when we look at the mouse tracking click heat map, oops, the mouse tracking recording, I should say, you can see we saw that people were having confusion about how to find their projects. They're going back to the nav, and they'd go to the new pages and keep going back to the nav, and there was a period of frustration where we would see the, like a star pattern that would happen with the mouse tracking, and that would show a period of frustration, right? So then we're able to go back to the drawing board and say, hey, maybe we should rethink some of the UI elements and the UX elements that are in the tool itself. Another example, behavior tracking click heat maps, right? Again, a lot of people are out there questioning whether this is useful at all. But by looking closely, we can see that in this case, this is, again, an e-commerce category page, and you can see the products here in the main body. There are filtering and sorting elements along the top of the products and in the left column. And we'll see that there's concentrations on color. There's a color button. There's a more colors link, which has the highest concentration on the page, and there's also a palette. And so that led to a question about whether there's some confusion between the words color and palette when they actually mean very similar things, and there's a lot of interest there. So could that imply that there's a potential for improvement, right? Shoppers clearly want to refine their results by color, but there's some inconsistency and potentially confusion. So that led to a test. We decided that, let's run a test based on some insights from that click heat map and some of the scroll maps and other analytics patterns that we'd seen in their web analytics. So we isolated the left column in this case and did a user experience test, testing the UX without touching any of the products or messaging in this case. And ended up, so that was the control, original navigation, which is very similar to a lot of clothing and fashion and merchandising navigations with a lot of options to choose from. And we started by condensing into to get the most important filters above the fold. So simplifying some of the user experience and the UI elements, condensing the palette into a drop-down and the pattern and the materials so that it was all above the fold. And then in another variation, we wanted to isolate to get an idea about color versus palette. And then we also added a variation that added in the red, blue, orange, and yellow and various color indicators to reinforce the words so that it took less cognitive effort to understand the drop-downs and the filtering options. And then another one which used a scrolling navigation to keep those filtering and sorting options with the user as they scroll through the products. And so, we always take a vote before the test to see everyone can guess which one they think won. And a lot of people love the scrolling one. And of course, there were some debates about palette versus color and what that would imply about the users. But that's why we test, right, to see what actually works. And was interesting, during the test, we did another click heat map analysis and showed, you can see this very clearly, much more concentration of clicks on the navigation. More people were engaged in the navigation with this new design and user experience. And that played out in the results as well. So the new design alone got a 15.6% lift in sales. And then the scrolling, which was isolated against the new design, right? Every test includes isolations to gain insights. Well, it turned out in this case that scrolling, persistent filtering and sorting did not work. Because you can see it only got a 9.8% lift compared to the 15.6 that it was isolated against. And then the variation that included the colors as well as the color indicators ended up far and away winning the test with a 23.6% lift in sales. So of course they got insights as well as dramatic business improvement based on hypotheses that came out of all of the explore elements that the strategists were looking at. So that's the digital analytics component. And then, of course, there are well-known persuasion principles. And so we're always looking at the latest research on behavioral economics and psychology and marketing persuasion to bring in persuasion principles that we can then validate and test within real-life scenarios, usually on landing pages or or the top end of the funnel, the more persuasional side of the funnel. And in fact, our strategists gather every week for an hour and a half to 2 hours and share all of the latest learning that we have gathered over the past week, all of the new test results that we've seen, and bring them to the rest of the team and debate and discuss how these persuasion principles could be applied to all of our clients' websites and marketing materials, and how we can test these new things within real-life environments. And in the business context, of course, is very important, which that's where the client's involved, right? The client, we know all of our clients understand their business at a much more intimate level than we ever will, and so we want to partner with our conversion champions within the companies to understand their questions and their business context and their business rules and of course all the graphic standards and all those things as well, but understand what are the questions that would be important to the business that could lead to strategic insights. So for example, we had a client just recently that had a question about whether it was possible to reduce the number of SKUs that they're manufacturing while still maintaining their profit. So they manufactured a certain type of consumer electronic device, and they had a dozen SKUs or 15 SKUs or so, and they wanted to understand whether they could manufacture fewer of them and still maintain their business results. So we actually brought that to a test and said, hey, you know what? I'm glad we're having this strategic conversation because we can test that. So we tested variations that had different combinations of the products, including fewer combinations, so that some visitors didn't see all the products. They only saw the most popular ones or a spectrum of the SKUs. And it ended up all of the variations, or two really important variations, had the same revenue and profit margin with less than a third of the SKUs. And so they're now got a potential insight that can lead to them reducing their manufacturing costs dramatically, reducing their business cost, and increasing their profit margins substantially by driving that insight from testing. And finally, the test archive. So since 2007, we've been running thousands of tests. We've got insights all over the place that we have gathered into a test archive, so that our strategists, every week we have what's called an aha moments presentation, where we present all of our latest results, and we store that into a test archive so that we can access those things, pull them out as needed for new companies coming in, and make sure that we can get to the best results faster by having access to those things. Now you'll see that within this explore phase, the arrows are pointing inward towards the central area, which is the lift model. And that's really the framework that we use to understand the perspective of the target audience that's coming to these marketing touch points. And they're pulled as needed. This isn't a step-by-step process. It's a process of accessing the type of tools, resources, and research that we need to fill in the gaps of our understanding of that prospect. And then the lift model is the framework for thinking about them. Now, if you haven't seen the lift model, I'll give you a brief overview of it. Most of you have probably seen this before. But the lift model shows the 6 conversion factors that are impacting your conversion rate right now. And it shows from the perspective of your shopper or your prospect on the site what they're thinking as they sit there looking at your screen. So the value proposition is the core of it, right? They need to understand the value to them from their perspective of taking action on that page. And it's an equation that goes on in their mind between the perceived cost of taking action and the perceived benefits. That potential for your conversion rate lift is totally dependent on your value proposition and the strength of that. The other factors simply enhance or detract from the value proposition. So the relevance of the presentation is the relevance to their needs and to the source media to where they just arrived from. The clarity of the presentation is clarity of the eye flow and the imagery. You can think of it, thinking about that the e-commerce category page we just saw, the clarity of the color versus palette. Those small cues can make a big difference in clarity. Anxiety is anything that creates uncertainty in the prospect's mind about taking action. Distraction is anything that redirects attention from the primary message or the primary call to action. And then urgency is why should they act now? So we'll look within each of these components and actually test within the components to find which ones have the most elasticity in a particular area that can lead to more hypotheses and lead to drilling into improving things even more. There are 27 sub-factors within the lift model, and we're constantly evaluating, adding, and refining within that as well. But really, the idea behind it is that we're always thinking about how putting ourselves in the shoes of the prospect and coming up with ideas that will solve their needs, communicate with more clarity and relevance to them, and persuade them to move to the next action.